The restaurant was busy, as it always was during the evening rush. The smell of fried food mixed with coffee and the faint scent of cleaning products filled the air. The small bell above the door jingled constantly as new customers walked in. She moved quickly, balancing plates and drinks in her hands, careful not to spill anything. Every table seemed to have its own mood. Some customers laughed loudly, others whispered to one another, and a few looked annoyed, tapping their fingers impatiently on the table. She tried to smile at all of them, but sometimes the exhaustion made it hard to keep up appearances. She had worked at this place for over 2 years now. Every day felt the same. Long hours on her feet, heavy trays and constant chatter all around her. She had learned to be fast, to read the moods of the guests, and to keep her own feelings in check. It wasn't easy, but it was her job and she took pride in doing it well. Still, no matter how much effort she put in, there were always those who looked down on her. It happened almost every day. Some guests made comments under their breath, thinking she couldn't hear them. "Look at her, just a waitress," one man muttered as he sipped his drink. Another couple laughed as she passed by, joking about how clumsy she looked carrying the trays. She had learned to ignore it mostly, but it stung sometimes, leaving a little ache in her chest that she tucked away behind a polite smile. Her co-workers tried to cheer her up when she got frustrated. "Don't let them get to you," one of them said, handing her a fresh tray of drinks. "They don't know anything. Just keep doing your job." She nodded, grateful for the support, but she wished they could understand more than just the words. She had dreams, quiet dreams that she didn't share with many people. Dreams that went beyond the small tables and the constant hustle of the restaurant. Music had always been her escape. She had grown up with a piano at home, learning slowly at first, then pouring hours into practice. It was something she kept to herself, something no one at work knew about. Sometimes, when the restaurant was slow, she imagined sitting in front of a piano, letting her fingers move freely, creating melodies that spoke the words she couldn't say out loud. In her imagination, she wasn't a waitress being laughed at. She was someone who could touch hearts, someone who could make people stop and listen. That evening, like most evenings, started with the usual chaos. Orders came in fast, drinks spilled, and plates clattered as she carried them across the floor. She moved with practiced grace, her steps quick and sure, but her mind kept wandering to the piano she missed so much. She imagined the soft hum of the strings, the way the notes could rise and fall, filling a room with emotion. She pictured herself playing in front of a small audience, people who listened and felt something real for a change. It was during a particularly busy moment that a group of guests arrived who didn't hide their impatience. They sat at a corner table, making jokes loud enough for her to hear. "She looks like she can't even carry a plate," one of them said with a smirk. The others laughed, slapping the table as they watched her move from table to table. She felt the familiar sting but forced a smile, setting down their drinks carefully. "Here you go," she said politely, trying to keep her voice steady. As she walked away, she muttered under her breath, "They don't know me at all." She paused for a moment, leaning against the counter when no one was looking. Her hands itched, not from the work, but from the longing for the piano she hadn't touched in weeks. Music had always been her safe place, and yet she had pushed it aside to work these long hours. She loved helping people, she truly did, but there was a part of her that ached to be seen for something more than a uniform and a tray. The shift continued, and the restaurant stayed crowded. Every time she passed the corner table, she caught glimpses of the group smirking or whispering to each other. She tried to focus on her work, taking orders, refilling drinks, and clearing plates, but the feeling of being underestimated never left her. Some co-workers noticed, some didn't, but she carried it quietly, letting it settle in the corners of her mind like a shadow. During a brief lull, she found herself near the piano that sat against the wall, usually used for small performances during special events. She ran her fingers over the keys lightly, just imagining the sound, imagining the music flowing from her hands. She didn't play. She couldn't risk being interrupted, but even touching the keys reminded her of who she was beyond the apron and the trays. The notes were familiar, comforting, a secret world where she was free. A customer at a nearby table glanced over and noticed her hand on the piano. "Do you play?" they asked with mild curiosity. She shook her head quickly. "Just a little," she said softly, not wanting to draw attention. She moved back to her station, feeling the ache in her chest grow a little sharper. She wished she could show them, could prove that she was more than what they saw. But the fear of being laughed at or worse ignored kept her silent. As the evening wore on, more guests came and went, and the restaurant seemed endless. She moved from table to table, balancing trays, smiling politely, and listening to complaints and jokes alike. She was tired, her feet ached, and her arms felt heavy, but she kept going. There was a rhythm to the work, a rhythm she had grown used to, but it didn't reach the part of her that craved something more. Music was the only thing that could fill that emptiness, and she held onto the thought as she wiped down a table. Around closing time, the group in the corner finished their meal. They called her over one last time, smirking. "You did your best, I guess," one of them said, clearly mocking her. "Maybe stick to the serving." They laughed and left, leaving her standing there with a deep sense of frustration and disappointment. She cleaned the table slowly, letting their words sink in for a moment. But then she straightened her back and shook her head. She wasn't going to let them take away her confidence completely. She knew her worth even if they didn't. Once the restaurant was finally quiet, she moved to the piano again. The staff had mostly gone home, leaving only a few cleaning up the last dishes. She sat down on the bench and rested her hands on the keys. No one was watching. No one could judge her. She let her fingers brush over the keys gently, imagining the notes flowing out in a melody that no one could interrupt. For a few minutes, she closed her eyes and let herself escape into the music she loved. Even in that small moment, she felt alive in a way the restaurant never allowed. The mocking voices faded into the background, replaced by the sound she carried in her mind. It wasn't just about the piano, it was about being seen, being heard, being something more than what the world told her she was. She stayed there a little longer, letting herself dream of a life where her talent mattered, where people didn't laugh at her, but listened, really listened. By the time she finally stood up and left the piano, the restaurant was dark and empty. She flipped off the lights, locked the doors behind her, and stepped out into the cool night. The streets were quiet, and the world felt bigger than the walls of the restaurant. Her heart was still heavy from the day, but there was a spark inside her, small but persistent, reminding her that she had something no one could take away. She had talent, she had dreams, and one day, she hoped, the world would notice. That night, as she walked home, the memory of the piano lingered in her mind. The mockery of the guests still stung, but it was no longer enough to dim her spirit. She carried the music with her, tucked safely inside, waiting for the moment she could share it, waiting for the moment she could prove that she was more than just a waitress. The restaurant was unusually busy that evening. The air was thick with the smell of fried food, coffee, and a hint of perfume from the guests. The small bell above the door jingled constantly as new visitors arrived, and she moved quickly, carrying trays and taking orders with her usual grace. But underneath the routine, she felt a quiet tension building. Something felt different that day, though she couldn't put her finger on it yet. The event had been announced earlier in the week. The restaurant had planned a small live music night to attract more guests. The regular pianist was supposed to arrive at 8 o'clock, a professional who often played soft, elegant tunes to create a pleasant atmosphere. She had seen him play before, but tonight he had canceled at the last minute. The manager had been in a panic, trying to find a replacement, and her coworkers had whispered among themselves, unsure what to do. It was in the midst of this chaos that someone, half-jokingly, suggested she could play. She froze, a tray of drinks in her hands. The words hung in the air, almost comical, because she had never performed in front of strangers. She had kept her music a secret, a private part of herself that no one at work knew about. Her fingers itched at the thought of the piano, but doubt rushed in immediately. She could feel her heart beat faster as she imagined standing in front of guests, people who often mocked her or ignored her, now waiting for her to perform. Her manager noticed her hesitation. "Come on, it could be fun," he said lightly. "Just give it a try. We need something, and you've always loved music, right?" She nodded, swallowing hard, trying to convince herself it wasn't too much. But deep inside, a small spark of excitement had begun to grow. She had dreamed about moments like this for years, dreamed of playing for people, of being heard, but she had never imagined it could happen in this ordinary restaurant. She excused herself for a moment and walked over to the piano that sat against the wall. It looked the same as it always had, polished and shining under the warm lights. She ran her fingers lightly over the keys, just to feel the familiar texture. Her heart raced, not just from nerves, but from anticipation. She had spent countless hours practicing alone, imagining herself performing. Now, for the first time, she had the chance to turn those private dreams into something real. Her coworkers crowded around, whispering and giving her small smiles of encouragement. Some were genuinely supportive, while others were still skeptical, unsure if she could pull it off. She felt the weight of their expectations and doubts, and for a moment, she almost backed away. But then she remembered the feeling of the piano under her fingers, the way the notes had always spoken to her. She took a deep breath, letting herself focus on that instead of the fear. The guests began to notice the movement, some looking curiously toward the piano, others continuing their meals unaware. She adjusted the bench, sitting carefully, and positioned her hands above the keys. Her fingers trembled slightly, but she forced herself to stay calm. The first notes were soft, almost hesitant, a gentle testing of the space and the audience. She imagined the guests listening, imagining the music flowing from her fingertips, and in that moment, she realized that she could do it. A few guests whispered to each other, some curious, some skeptical. "Is she really going to play?" one asked. Another chuckled quietly. She heard them, of course, but she tried not to let their doubts affect her. She focused on the music she knew so well, the melodies she had practiced for years in the quiet of her room. Each note was deliberate, small at first, but growing in confidence as she continued. Her fingers moved over the keys with increasing ease. The soft notes began to fill the restaurant, weaving around the chatter and the clatter of dishes. Something shifted in the room, though it was subtle at first. Guests began to pause in their conversations, heads turning toward the piano. Some leaned forward in their seats, intrigued. Others simply stopped mid-bite, their curiosity catching them by surprise. The atmosphere was changing, slowly, as her music began to take hold. The longer she played, the more confident she became. Her nerves didn't disappear entirely, but they transformed into energy, a quiet determination to prove herself. Not for the skeptics, not for the mocking guests, but for herself. She thought about all the times she had been underestimated, ignored, or laughed at. Each memory fueled her fingers, giving strength to the music that was beginning to rise from the piano like a living thing. One guest, who had been openly mocking her earlier in the evening, shifted uncomfortably in their chair. They had expected an awkward, clumsy performance, but the music was not that at all. It was precise, full of emotion, and surprisingly moving. Their expressions softened, a flicker of respect appearing where there had once been doubt. Other guests began to murmur quietly, their conversations slowing as they listened more closely. The room was changing and she could feel it. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the music guide her hands. She remembered the quiet nights at home, practicing alone, imagining herself in front of a crowd that actually cared. Now the crowd was here, though she hadn't imagined it like this, and the realization made her chest tighten. This was real. This was happening. And she was part of it, fully, completely, without hiding. Her mind wandered to the stories she had imagined telling through music, stories of hope, resilience, and quiet triumph. She realized she was telling those stories now, not just for herself, but for everyone listening. The mocking voices that had haunted her at work seemed distant, irrelevant, as the music carried a new message, that talent could not be ignored, that passion could not be silenced. Guests began to lean in more, some whispering their admiration. "She's really good," one woman said quietly. Another nodded, eyes wide with surprise. Even the staff in the back, who had been skeptical at first, watched in awe. The restaurant felt different somehow. No longer just a place for food and conversation, but a space alive with music, emotion, and connection. Minutes passed, though they felt like hours, as she continued to play. Each chord, each sequence, was infused with the energy of the moment. The anticipation, the fear, and the quiet thrill of finally stepping into the spotlight. She had been a waitress, seen and ignored by many, but now she was something else entirely. She was a musician, a storyteller, a person capable of touching hearts without words. The first applause came almost unexpectedly. A guest clapped softly, then another, and soon the entire restaurant joined in. The sound was not loud or chaotic, but it was genuine, filled with appreciation and amazement. Her heart leapt at the sound, a mixture of relief, joy, and pride. She had done it. She had taken a chance and created something beautiful in front of people who had never expected it. The manager approached cautiously, a smile spreading across his face. "I can't believe it," he said. "That was incredible. I didn't know you could play like that." She smiled softly, feeling a quiet warmth that went beyond pride. It wasn't just about recognition from others. It was about finally embracing her own talent, about proving to herself that she could step forward and shine when it mattered. As the applause faded, she continued to play gently, letting the music carry the emotion and the moment a little longer. Guests listened, captivated, some closing their eyes, some leaning on tables, all absorbing the feeling she had poured into the piano. The room was no longer filled with doubt, mockery, or casual conversation. It was alive with attention, admiration, and a quiet sense of wonder. By the time she finished the piece, the room erupted in applause again, louder this time, filled with energy and excitement. Guests rose from their seats, clapping and cheering, some even standing to show their admiration. The group that had previously mocked her looked surprised, unsure how to react, but slowly, they joined in, their expressions softening into genuine amazement. She smiled quietly, letting the moment sink in. That night, for the first time in her life, she realized that she had stepped beyond the world that had underestimated her. The mocking voices no longer mattered. The doubts, the whispers, the laughter, everything that had held her back, had been transformed by her courage and her talent. She had taken the opportunity, unexpected as it was, and turned it into something extraordinary. After the guests had returned to their meals and the restaurant settled into a quieter rhythm, she stayed by the piano, letting her fingers linger on the keys. She didn't play again immediately, not yet. She simply sat, feeling the energy of the room, the echoes of the music, and the shift that had taken place. The first performance had not been perfect, but it had been real, and that was all that mattered. She thought about the future, about what could come next. The spark had been lit, a small but powerful reminder that her talent could not remain hidden forever. She had discovered a new side of herself, a side that could step forward, face fear, and create something unforgettable. The thought filled her with a quiet excitement and hope, a feeling she had not experienced in years. That night, as the restaurant emptied and the last lights were turned off, she walked home slowly, replaying every moment in her mind. The anticipation, the nerves, the first tentative notes, and the eventual applause. All of it felt surreal, like a dream she had finally stepped into. She knew that her life had changed in some way, even if just slightly. She had taken the first step towards something bigger, something that could reshape how people saw her and, more importantly, how she saw herself. The room was full of chatter, the sound of cutlery clinking against plates, and the low murmur of people talking while waiting for their food. She walked toward the piano, each step heavy in her chest, though her hands trembled with a mixture of fear and excitement. The event was meant to have a professional pianist, but a last-minute cancellation left the restaurant scrambling. Someone had jokingly suggested she could play, not realizing how serious the suggestion would become. At first, she wanted to refuse. She had never performed in front of strangers before. What if she made a mistake? What if they laughed at her? Her heart pounded in her chest as she looked at the piano, polished and shining under the warm light. She swallowed hard, trying to steady herself. Deep inside, a small voice whispered, "This is your moment. Don't let fear stop you." She took a deep breath and sat on the piano bench. The room felt suddenly very quiet, though the guests were still chatting around her. She placed her fingers on the keys, hesitant at first. The first note she played was soft and uncertain, almost fragile. It didn't fill the room, but it was hers, and it was real. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sound sink in, letting herself remember the hours she had spent at home, learning and practicing, dreaming of moments like this. A few guests glanced over, curiosity mixing with doubt. Some whispered among themselves, smiling or laughing quietly. "She's a waitress. What could she possibly do?" One of them muttered. She heard the words but tried to block them out, focusing instead on the music she could create. She took another breath and pressed her fingers to the keys with more confidence. The notes started to flow more smoothly now, tentative but growing stronger. The music began to change the atmosphere in the room. The clatter of dishes and the chatter of conversation faded slightly as people began to notice. It was not loud or showy, but there was a subtle magic in the way her fingers moved over the keys. Each note seemed to carry emotion, a story of frustration, hope, and dreams that refused to be ignored. The hesitant whispers and laughter from the guests began to die down, replaced by quiet attention. She could feel it, the change in the air, the shift in energy. It was as if the restaurant itself had paused, leaning in to listen. The mocking looks from earlier were still there on some faces, but even those expressions softened as her fingers danced across the piano. She had never felt anything like this. The music was no longer just something she played for herself. It was connecting with the people around her, touching them in ways words could never do. As she continued, her confidence grew. The first hesitant notes turned into a flowing melody, each one richer and more deliberate. She remembered a piece she had composed herself years ago, one that had always been her favorite, full of highs and lows, quiet moments and bursts of energy. Her fingers knew the way without thinking, moving naturally as if the piano and she were speaking to each other. A couple sitting near the front leaned closer, their eyes widening. One whispered, "She's amazing." Others turned their heads, unable to resist listening. Even the group who had been mocking her before stopped their laughter. The smirks faded as their attention became captured by the sound. For the first time, they were seeing her not as a waitress, not as someone ordinary, but as someone with real talent, someone who could make them feel something without even saying a word. She didn't notice the tears in a few eyes or the way people were holding their breath. All she could feel was the music, the connection, and the sheer joy of sharing what had always been a secret part of her. The room had changed. It was no longer just a restaurant full of diners. It was a small concert hall, filled with people who were listening, really listening for the first time. One guest, an older woman sitting near the corner, whispered to her friend, "I can't believe this. I thought it would be just some awkward performance. But it's beautiful." The words made her heart skip a beat, a quiet warmth spreading through her chest. She hadn't expected recognition. Not like this. Not from strangers who had barely noticed her before. Yet here they were, captivated by her, drawn into the world she had carried inside herself for so long. As the piece built to its climax, she poured every bit of emotion into the notes. She thought about the days she had been mocked, the times she had been ignored or underestimated. All that frustration, all that pain, found its way into the melody. But so did hope, determination, and the quiet joy of finally being seen. Each note seemed to speak louder than words, telling the story of someone who had been underestimated, but had never given up on her dreams. By the time she reached the final notes, the room was completely silent. Even the clattering of utensils and the murmurs of conversation had stopped. People were leaning forward, eyes fixed on her hands, hearts drawn in by the music that had seemed to flow from nowhere and everywhere at once. Her fingers lingered on the final chord, holding it as long as she could, feeling the vibrations, the energy of the room, and the disbelief in the eyes of those who had doubted her. Then the sound faded. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. She opened her eyes slowly, breathing heavily, not knowing what would happen next. And then it came, the soft, hesitant clapping from one table, quickly spreading until the entire restaurant was applauding. The sound was overwhelming, a mix of surprise, admiration, and joy. She had never experienced anything like it. The applause wasn't just for her music. It was for her. For the courage it took to stand there and share herself with people who had mocked her just moments before. Some of the guests who had laughed at her earlier looked ashamed. Their expressions softened, replaced by amazement. They whispered to one another, nodding and murmuring words she could not hear clearly. She smiled quietly, not out of arrogance, but out of relief and happiness. The moment she had dreamed about, even in her imagination, had come true. She had been underestimated, mocked, and still, she had shown them what she was capable of. The restaurant owner, who had been watching from the side, approached her with a smile. "I didn't know you could play like that," he said, genuinely impressed. "You have something special. People need to hear this." She nodded, still catching her breath, feeling a mixture of pride and humility. She had always loved music for herself, but now she saw how it could touch others, how it could make people pause, reflect, and feel something real. A few customers came forward, asking about her, complimenting her performance, and even taking pictures to remember the moment. She answered politely, smiling, but her mind was still spinning from the experience. She couldn't stop thinking about how different it felt to be recognized, to be seen not as a waitress, but as someone with talent, someone who had a story worth listening to. As the evening wound down and the guests left, she remained at the piano for a few more minutes, letting the music flow one last time. She closed her eyes, feeling the satisfaction of having shared a part of herself, of having turned a moment of doubt into a moment of triumph. The earlier mocking, the harsh whispers, all seemed distant now, replaced by something much stronger. The knowledge that she could rise above, that she could shine even when others didn't believe in her. Walking away from the piano, she felt lighter than she had in years. The evening had changed something inside her. It wasn't just about music. It was about self-belief, courage, and the power of showing the world who she truly was. For the first time, she realized that her talent wasn't just a private escape. It was a gift, one that could reach others, inspire them, and even change how they saw her. That night, as she left the restaurant, the streets felt alive under the streetlights. She carried the memory of the performance with her, replaying it in her mind like a precious treasure. For the first time, the mocking voices of the guests didn't matter. She had faced them, faced her fears, and revealed a part of herself that had always been waiting to be seen. And she knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning. The music had stopped, but the echo of the notes lingered in the room like a soft whisper that refused to fade. The guests were still seated, their eyes wide and fixed on her as if they were seeing her for the first time. For a moment, no one spoke. The laughter and chatter that had filled the restaurant earlier seemed like a distant memory, replaced by a quiet, reverent energy. She sat there, her fingers resting lightly on the piano keys, catching her breath, still feeling the tremor of excitement and disbelief. The applause that followed had been warm and genuine, not just polite clapping, but the kind that came from people who were truly moved. She had never expected this. All she had wanted was to play, to share the music she loved. She had never imagined that anyone would stop to listen, that anyone would feel it the way she did. Some of the guests had risen from their seats. A few were leaning forward, speaking in hushed tones to one another, their faces softened with awe. One man had tears in his eyes, as if the music had touched something deep inside him that he hadn't been able to reach for a long time. A young woman held her hands together, smiling softly, while a child sat silently, eyes wide, clearly entranced. Even those who had mocked her before seemed unsure, their previous laughter replaced with surprise and admiration. The restaurant owner approached her again, this time with a mixture of pride and amazement. "I can't believe you just did that," he said, almost breathless. You've changed the whole atmosphere in here. People are talking about it, even those who came in thinking it would just be a normal night. You've got something special." She nodded, feeling a warmth in her chest, a mix of pride and humility. She had always loved music for herself, for the way it made her feel, but now she could see that it had the power to touch others, to move them, and to make a difference in their evening. Guests began to approach her one by one. A man, probably in his 50s, reached out his hand. "That was incredible," he said simply. "You have a gift. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise." Another guest, a young woman, smiled brightly. "I've never heard anything like that. You really should play more often. Everyone needs to hear this." They didn't ask for her name or where she worked. They were speaking to the person she had become in those few minutes, the version of herself she had always dreamed of showing the world. She smiled quietly, her heart full. It felt strange, almost unreal, to be recognized, to be seen in this way. For so long, she had been invisible, just another waitress carrying trays, taking orders, being laughed at by people who didn't know her. And now, in this moment, she was visible. Not as a waitress, not as someone ordinary, but as a musician, as someone who could create something beautiful that could make people stop and listen. The guests began to talk among themselves, sharing their reactions. "I can't believe she's a waitress," one woman said, shaking her head in disbelief. "I thought she would just be clumsy or nervous, but she's amazing." Others nodded, murmuring agreement, their previous judgments completely reversed. Some even took out their phones, discreetly recording small parts of her performance or sharing pictures, capturing a moment that felt too important to forget. As she watched the reactions, a sense of calm washed over her. She had expected judgment, expected more laughter, expected people to ignore her or whisper behind her back. But none of that had mattered in the end. The music had spoken for her. It had said everything she wanted to say, everything she had kept hidden inside, and the audience had understood. They had listened, truly listened, and that realization filled her with a quiet joy she had never known before. Her co-workers, who had been clearing tables and working nearby, now looked at her with surprise and admiration. One of them whispered, "I had no idea she could do that. That was incredible." Another nodded, shaking their head, as if still trying to process what had happened. The shift in perception was remarkable. She was no longer just someone they worked alongside. She had become someone extraordinary, someone whose talent demanded recognition. The older woman from the corner table approached her carefully. "I just want to say," she began softly, "that what you played, it moved me. I don't even know how to explain it. You have a rare gift. Thank you for sharing it." The words touched her deeply. She realized that this was the kind of moment she had always wanted, not fame, not applause, not recognition for its own sake, but the chance to connect, to make people feel something real, even if just for a little while. As the evening continued, more and more guests lingered near the piano, quietly discussing what they had just heard. The atmosphere had completely changed. The restaurant, once a place of routine and noise, had become a space of admiration and awe. The energy was different now. People were inspired, thoughtful, and more aware of the talent that had been hiding in plain sight. It was as if the music had shifted something inside each person, leaving them a little more open, a little more appreciative of the unexpected beauty in life. She remained at the piano for a while, letting the notes flow gently again, not performing formally, but simply allowing the music to fill the space. People listened, some leaning on tables, others standing quietly in corners, absorbed in the sound. Each note was deliberate, carrying emotion, telling a story without words. She felt herself becoming more confident with every chord, more aware of the connection she was creating. Her inner thoughts drifted back to all the times she had been mocked, all the moments she had been overlooked or underestimated. She realized that those experiences had led her here, had made her stronger and more determined to let her talent shine when the opportunity came. The pain of being doubted had not disappeared, but it had been transformed into something powerful, something that now gave her courage and purpose. The applause came again, spontaneous and heartfelt, whenever she ended a small piece or played a particularly emotional sequence. She felt the warmth of it spreading through her, a quiet but intense sense of fulfillment. She had always loved music for the way it made her feel, but now she understood its true power, to move others, to create empathy, to change a space entirely. She had always dreamed of being heard, and at last she was. Even the guests who had been mocking her earlier seemed changed. Their expressions were softer, their earlier smirks replaced with respect. Some avoided looking directly at her, unsure how to respond, while others nodded quietly, acknowledging the skill and passion she had displayed. They had come expecting nothing, and yet they had witnessed something extraordinary. The restaurant owner spoke to her privately for a moment. "You have talent that deserves to be shared," he said, his tone sincere. "I don't want you to wait for another chance by accident. I want to help you get more opportunities. You could perform here regularly, or even in bigger places. People need to hear this." She felt a mixture of surprise and gratitude. She had never imagined that a single night could change how people saw her, including those who had been closest to her work life. As the last guests finally left and the restaurant emptied, she sat at the piano alone. The room was quiet, the echo of her music still hanging in the air. She closed her eyes and played softly, each note a reflection of everything she had experienced that evening. The fear, the courage, the joy, and the connection. She realized that this was more than a performance. It was a turning point, a moment when she had moved from being unseen to being truly recognized. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of completeness. It wasn't about applause or validation from others. It was about embracing her gift, about understanding that her talent had the power to touch lives. She had always known she could play, but now she knew she could make people feel something that mattered, something lasting. She stayed at the piano a little longer, letting the quiet of the empty restaurant fill her with calm. The earlier mocking, the doubts, and the fears seemed distant now, like shadows fading in the light of a new day. She had discovered a strength within herself she hadn't fully realized, a confidence born not from being praised, but from knowing her own worth and courage. Finally, she stood, stretching her arms and brushing her hands over the keys one last time. She took a deep breath, savoring the quiet, and stepped away from the piano. Walking toward the door, she looked back once, feeling a sense of gratitude for the unexpected moment that had allowed her to shine. It had been a night she would never forget, a night when her hidden talent had been revealed, and when she had finally shown the world, and herself, who she truly was. The streets outside were quiet under the glow of the streetlights. She walked home slowly, replaying the evening in her mind, each moment vivid and unforgettable. The experience had changed her, had given her a glimpse of what was possible when courage met opportunity. She felt lighter, freer, and more alive than she had in years. She knew that life would continue to challenge her, that work and responsibilities would still demand much from her. But something fundamental had shifted. She had been underestimated, mocked, and doubted. And yet, she had emerged victorious. Her music had spoken, her talent had shown, and for the first time, she felt seen, heard, and valued in a way that mattered deeply. That night, she fell asleep with a smile, her mind filled with melodies and possibilities. The world had finally begun to notice the person she had always been, and she felt ready to face whatever came next, confident that her music could guide her, sustain her, and reveal the extraordinary within the ordinary. The days after that unforgettable night were different in ways she hadn't expected. The restaurant still bustled with its usual rhythm of clattering dishes, ringing bells, and the chatter of guests, but something had shifted. People looked at her differently now, and she could feel it. The same tables where she had once been ignored or mocked now held eyes that were warmer, more respectful, and sometimes even curious. It wasn't just about her being a waitress anymore. It was about the person she had revealed herself to be. A few of the guests who had attended the night of her performance came back, specifically asking if she would be playing again. They smiled when they saw her, their tone gentle and kind. One of them, an older man, approached her while she carried a tray of drinks. "You really have a gift," he said. I've been thinking about that performance ever since. I hope you keep playing for people. Don't hide it again. She felt a flutter in her chest, a mix of gratitude and disbelief. It was surreal to hear such words, knowing they were meant genuinely, not out of obligation. Her coworkers also noticed the change. They treated her differently now, their comments filled with admiration instead of casual teasing. I never knew you could do that, one said quietly as they wiped down tables together. You really blew everyone away. She smiled, feeling a quiet warmth spread through her. The shift in perception was remarkable, but what mattered more was the realization that she had finally stepped into her own, that she had shown herself what she was capable of. Even the restaurant owner, who had always been practical and focused on running the business, seemed more attentive. He approached her one afternoon with a thoughtful expression. I've been thinking, he began, about your performance the other night. People loved it, and I think we should make it a regular thing. You could play here on certain evenings. It's not just good for the restaurant. It's good for you too. You deserve to be seen. She blinked, overwhelmed by the idea. It was more than she had hoped for, more than she had imagined. She nodded, her hands trembling slightly with excitement and nerves. The first time she returned to the piano with a small audience expecting her to play, her heart raced. She sat down on the bench, feeling the familiar weight of nerves mixed with anticipation. But the moment her fingers touched the keys, it all melted away. The music flowed naturally, freely, without hesitation. She had been afraid that performing again would be different, that the magic of the first night couldn't be recreated. But she was wrong. Each note carried the same emotion, the same passion, and now it was accompanied by a quiet confidence she had never felt before. Guests came in, some new and some returning, curious to hear her play. They were captivated from the first note. Some leaned forward, eyes wide, while others closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. She could see the same reactions she had seen on that first night. The surprise, the awe, the gentle smiles of people moved by something they hadn't expected. The connection she had felt before was there again. Stronger now, more deliberate. She was no longer just discovering her talent. She was sharing it fully and openly. Word began to spread beyond the walls of the restaurant. Friends of guests, people in the neighborhood, and even strangers passing by heard about the waitress who could play the piano in a way that left everyone speechless. Some came specifically to see her perform, intrigued by the story and eager to witness the music firsthand. She found herself smiling at the thought that something once hidden had now become a beacon, drawing people in. Her music, once private and safe, was now a bridge connecting her to the world. With the growing recognition, she started to think about what she truly wanted. The restaurant remained her main job, a place she enjoyed and where she felt comfortable, but the idea of pursuing music more seriously began to take root. Invitations for small events, private gatherings, and even local showcases started to appear. She didn't rush into anything, but she allowed herself to dream bigger than she had in years, realizing that her life could be more than the daily routine she had accepted for so long. Her personal confidence grew alongside the recognition. She began to hold herself differently, walking with a quiet pride, carrying herself with the knowledge that she had a skill and a gift worth sharing. The mocking voices from the past no longer had power over her. She remembered them, yes, but they were distant echoes compared to the strong affirmation she received from her music and the people who appreciated it. Each note she played reminded her that she was capable, that she could rise above judgment, and that her voice, though expressed through piano keys, mattered. One evening, after a performance at the restaurant, she stayed behind a little longer, enjoying the quiet. The staff had left, the tables were cleared, and the piano keys still shone under the warm lights. She sat down and played softly, not for anyone in particular, but for herself. Each chord carried the story of her journey. The struggle, the doubt, the small triumphs, and the courage it had taken to finally be seen. The music felt alive, almost as if it recognized her own growth and celebrated it. She thought about the guests who had once mocked her, remembering their surprised expressions from that first night. She didn't feel anger or bitterness anymore. Instead, She felt a sense of completeness, a quiet satisfaction. She had turned a moment of ridicule into a moment of triumph. She had shown not only them but herself what she was truly capable of. That feeling, stronger than applause or recognition, became a foundation for her future. Over time, her life began to shift in small but meaningful ways. Regulars at the restaurant asked for her specifically, some bringing friends to hear her play. Local musicians reached out, curious about her skill and hoping to collaborate. Invitations to community events arrived, offering her the chance to perform for larger audiences. Each opportunity was a step forward, a chance to grow her talent and share her music more widely. She embraced them carefully, balancing work and her growing music career, but always with a sense of excitement and purpose. Despite the growing attention, she remained humble. She remembered the years of quiet practice, the hours spent alone at the piano, and the moments when no one believed in her. Those memories kept her grounded, reminding her that her talent was not just for recognition. It was for the joy of creating, the connection with others, and the quiet power of perseverance. She never forgot where she had come from, and that authenticity made her music even more moving. Friends and colleagues who had once teased or overlooked her now approached with respect. They admired her determination and the way she had transformed a simple opportunity into something extraordinary. "You've really inspired me," one coworker said quietly. "I never thought someone could surprise everyone like that." She smiled, grateful for the support and the sense of community she felt. She realized that her journey was not just about music. It was about resilience, courage, and the ability to show the world who she truly was. The first time she performed in front of a larger audience outside the restaurant, she felt the familiar mix of nerves and excitement. But she remembered that night when she first played for the guests who had mocked her, and she felt a quiet confidence settle over her. Each note she played told her story, and she could see the same awe and admiration in the audience's eyes. It was a new chapter, a step toward a future she had once only imagined, and it felt exhilarating. Her life continued to change, slowly but surely. The music brought new experiences, new connections, and new recognition. Yet she remained the same person at heart, humble, kind, and dedicated to her craft. The transformation was not just external. It was internal. She understood herself better, valued her own worth, and embraced the possibilities ahead with courage and joy. And so, her story became one of quiet triumph. From being mocked and underestimated, she had risen to be recognized and admired. From carrying trays and enduring doubt, she had moved to creating music that touched hearts and inspired others. Her journey was a reminder that talent, courage, and perseverance could shine through even in the most ordinary circumstances, and that sometimes the world only needed a moment to see what had been hidden all along. At the end of each day, when the restaurant closed and the lights dimmed, she would sit at the piano and play for herself. The notes were her voice, her story, and her freedom. She had discovered the strength to reveal herself, to transform fear into courage, and to turn a moment of doubt into a lifetime of possibilities. And every time she played, she remembered that first night. The night she had been mocked and yet had left everyone speechless. It was a memory that would stay with her forever, a reminder that she could achieve more than she had ever imagined, as long as she trusted herself and her talent. Her journey was far from over. Opportunities, challenges, and new experiences awaited, but she no longer feared them. She faced each day with a quiet confidence, a deep understanding of her worth, and the knowledge that her music could carry her through, touching the lives of those around her. She had been a waitress, underestimated and laughed at, and yet she had become something extraordinary. She had found her voice, her courage, and her place in the world. And as she played, as the notes flowed under her fingers and filled the room with life, she knew this was only the beginning. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was a bridge, a path, and a promise. She had shown herself and the world what she was capable of. And in that moment, with the music rising and the memories of the past fading, she smiled, ready for whatever came next.